Hi everyone, my name is Leah Kopke and I'm a 3D motion design freelancer. In each one of these episodes, we go over another 3D modeling tool for Cinema 4D, and today's 3D modeling tool is Extrude. But it isn't the kind of Extrude we went over last time within our Mesh Tools menu. Today's Extrude is a generator. And what's great about generators is that you can keyframe them a little bit more easily than you could an editable mesh. We're going to jump into all of the settings for the Extrude while using these lollipops as an example because I thought that would be more fun. So let's jump into Cinema 4D and show how this tool works. So I had created these lollipops. They're a great example of what you can do with this Extrude generator. We're going to start over though, and we're going to create our own project in here. So I'll hit the plus arrow here. We have our new scene set up. I am working in inches today, so I'll select inches in here. Under preferences, within units, I also have inches selected. I'd like to keep garage shading lines on so that as I 3D model, I can see the edges in my model. I'll hold a click right here on our splines and we're going to drop in a star so that we have a great place to work off of. Our inner radius is going to be 2.5 inches and our outer radius is going to be 3 inches. For our star, this is going to be the start of our lollipop. And you'll be able to find your generators in a couple places. Under the Create menu under Generators, you can find your Extrude here. You can also find it under here, Extrude. So if you hold a click right here, so I'll select the Extrude. And with that done, you'll see nothing has changed in our scene. What we need to do is drop this star within the hierarchy of the Extrude, and you'll see it is extruding. Our Extrude has a lot of different settings in here. In the Basic tab, you can adjust the icon, and this is available for all generators. You can adjust if this is visible in the viewport or not, and also in the render if it's able to be viewed or not. I see a lot of students accidentally click these on and off and they ask me why their model isn't showing up, so good to know. Enabled will enable the Extrude to be working. If you check this off, it will turn off the Extrude. If you turn it on, it will work. You can also adjust the same setting up here. It's off, it's on. Display color. Right now we have it set to material. You can set it to the layer color. Your layers are in here. And yes, it is a lot like Photoshop. You can create layers in here and apply colors to them. You can use automatic. You could also use custom, and you can choose a custom color in here. I'm going to leave this on material. You have this option called X-ray, and it will make your model a little bit see-through so that you can see through it, and you might find that helpful. I'm going to turn that off. We do not need to see through this. Our next options are coordinates. You have your position, rotation, and scale options here. In the Object tab, you have your direction. It's automatically set to auto, and auto will be Cinema 4D guessing at what direction you want this extruded based on the orientation of your spline. Now, you can also choose this. You could choose to have this extrude in the X direction. You could see this is the X-axis. It's red, it's going that way. The Y direction, Y is the green arrow. In the Z direction, which is the Z arrow. You can also choose to make it absolute. Now, when you choose absolute as your direction, you have a lot more options. We have this new option here called movement. If I move this to the right, you can see that we are changing the extrusion. And this might come in helpful if you are extruding legs for a table and you want them to be angled. You can adjust the movement. You can adjust it in all different directions, so you have a lot of control over the direction this is extruding. This first box is affecting the x-axis. The second box is affecting the y-axis. The third box is affecting the z-axis. Subdivisions is affecting how many subdivisions you have along your extrusion. If you decide to use any deformers on this, you'll need to increase your subdivisions in order to see deformers work. Your isoparm subdivisions are a little bit different than your subdivisions. Your isoparm subdivisions you won't be able to see unless if you go into your display menu and turn on isoparms. We can increase the number of isoparms. What these do is they just show the form of your model, but they aren't showing the actual edges in your model. If you want to see the edges on your polygons while you're 3D modeling, I suggest to leave this on wireframe. Isoparms just helps communicate the form. And H is the hotkey for wireframe, and I is the hotkey for isoparms. I'll go ahead and set that back. We have two options here, reverse normals and hierarchical. Reverse normals I'm going to actually show on a different example. But first, before we do that, I'd also like to go through the custom settings for direction, since we're going in an order. So similar to absolute, absolute is using the movement to determine the amount of offset. But custom, you have this option called offset, and it's no longer grayed out. So you can adjust these settings independently. And we can change our offset to 0.25, which makes much more sense for a lollipop to begin with. Now, for movement, this could be 0. Actually, it just makes more sense to set this on auto because we aren't needing this to go in any specific direction other than the automatic direction that Cinema 4D is choosing right now. That works fine. We don't need this many subdivisions. I'll take this down to 1. That cleans up our geometry quite a bit. Isoparms I'll set back to default because we're not even using that for modeling right now. Reverse normals I'd like to dive a little bit deeper in, but first I'd like to show that this is more useful if you have an open spline. So I'll go into our front view. I hit the middle mouse button so that we can see our quadrant views and we can see each view while we're working. If I hit the middle mouse button again in another view, we'll see this view. I can click on the spline pen. I have another tutorial on this where I go greater in depth into this. You can also tell that my spline are different colors because I changed that in the settings so that it's easier for you to see. You can adjust that under Edit Preferences within Scheme Colors under the Viewport. You can adjust your spline start, spline end, and points. But for right now, I'm going to leave it as is. This is our spline. Now that this spline is open, it's harder for Cinema 4D to determine what's the inside of the model and what's the outside of the model when it's being extruded. And the reason why this matters is because it can affect when you do dynamic simulations. It can affect a lot of different things. It can affect how Cinema 4D calculates your textures when rendering. So you need to let it know what's the inside of your model and what's the outside of your model, and it does that with normals. And I have a whole other episode just on how to fix the normals within your models. But for right now, we're going to go through this just for the extrude tool. If you want to learn more about normals, I'll leave a link to that episode below. Now for this, we're going to drop in another extrude. We're going to extrude this spline. I'm going to hit the middle mouse button so you can see what's happening in this view and go back into perspective using that middle mouse button. Now I made this spline pretty large. I didn't even realize how large I made it, but that's okay for this example. Within our spline and our extrude, we have this option here. So I'm going to actually duplicate this. I'm going to hit Control C, Control V. On Mac, it's Command C, Command V. I'm working on a PC here. In our first extrude, this is going to have reverse normals. And in this second extrude, it's going to be the default. So this one, reverse normals, we're going to check that box. I'm going to move this over in model mode over to the right. Now we have these both over here. I'm going to click on both of these and hit the C hotkey to make these meshes editable. Now this will remove all the settings we have for these generators, and it will make them a mesh that we can edit with the other mesh 3D modeling tools. But it will also allow you to see which direction these normals are going, so I'll hit C. Now with that done, we have two meshes here, and you can see that the icon has changed from the extrude icon to the mesh icon. Or actually, in here you can see that it's called an empty polygon icon, but I like to call it a mesh icon because that's easier. I'll hit this polygon mode button here, and I'll select these over here. You can see that they are orange. Now, if I select the ones on here, you can see they are purple. That is how Cinema 4D tells you what's the inside and what's the outside. So I'll actually select both of these here. If I turn this on the other side, the colors are swapped. Orange is the outside of an object, purple is the inside, and that is how Cinema 4D lets you know what is the normal direction. The normal direction is what is the outside of the object. So now you know what that option in there does. I'm going to delete these because we do not need them. And I'll go back over here to our extruded star. The next option here is hierarchical. I will copy and paste this star. I will also drop this within the hierarchy of this extrude. And I will use the E hotkey in order to move this to the right. And you can see we have two stars within this extrude, but it is not extruding both. If you wanted to extrude everything within its hierarchy, you click this button here, and now you have two extruded stars, and that is how you do that. Going to delete the second star because I don't need it. Within our next option here is caps. I'll click caps. You can choose if you'd like caps at the start and the end. That's what these checkboxes are. And for right now, just to give you an idea of what that does, I'll uncheck the start, and you can see there's no longer a cap on that side. That's the cap. What's missing? And same thing on the other side. That's the cap, and that's the end. Right now we have n-gon as our tessellation. It will make both of the caps an n-gon, a polygon with more than 4 edges. If we choose triangles, it will make the caps out of triangles. Polygon with 3 edges. If you choose quadrangles, it will make the caps using a combination of triangles and quads. Quads have 4 edges. These are quadrangles. Catchphrase for the two of them together. We have Delaunay and I never am really sure if I'm pronouncing that right. So forgive me if I'm saying that word wrong. But that'll make a tessellation another kind of tessellation option, as you can see what it looks like here. I see that more in 3D printing. The next option here is regular grid. This is probably more helpful if you're doing any kind of dynamic simulation with your models. I will reduce the size down, and you'll see this begin to update. Need to make it something quite a bit small. This is determining the size of our grid. And if you don't want it to have these triangles in here, you can click this button here and it will make it quad dominant, as in its name. And now you can see it has mostly quads. It is quad dominant now. For our bevels, you can choose to have separate controls. Now, if I don't click this on and I start adding some rounding to this, that's too much. I'm going to make this 0.25. You can see that it's adding rounding to the two different sides of our star. But what if I want to control these separately? You can click this button here and you'll see you have a start and an end, and you can affect these separately. In this case, I don't want separate controls. It's a lollipop. It's going to be the same on both sides. You can adjust the size of this bevel here under size. I chose a 1/4 inch. You can adjust the number of subdivisions, and you can see what that does here. Right now we have 3. If I increase this, you see that there are more segments on this bevel, defining its form. The tension is at 100%, which means this is rounding outwards. If I take this to be negative 100%, it's going the opposite direction and it's beveling in the opposite direction. If I make this 0, it will be a straight line. That gives you an idea of what these values are determining. For right now, I'm going to leave this up at 100%, which is the natural amount for a bevel. If I select extrude, you can adjust how much this extrudes out. I do not want this to extrude out, so I'm going to right click on this left arrow and that will set it to the default of 0. I'll deselect extrude. So those are your rounding options. If we go over to solid instead, and I'm going to decrease the subdivisions to 1. This is actually used along with the subdivision surface. So if I drop this into the subdivision surface, you can see now that I can turn this off with Q. This is our original model. This is our model in the subdivision surface. It rounds everything out, including these edges. And it'll round it depending on how close the edge is to the other edge. So when you add in under solid a bevel, I'll turn this off, you could see that it's adding this edge in here, which is allowing this to create a bevel while in the subdivision surface. The subdivision surface does 2 things. It smooths things out and it subdivides it so that it has more polygons. That's what that does if you're doing subdivision surface modeling. I'm going to delete the subdivision surface. You can adjust the size of the bevel again here. Be careful that you don't overdo that, or else you'll get some crazy geometry that you do not want. I'll make this 0.5. You can see that that is adjusting that setting there. You can adjust the number of subdivisions here as well. Under our step settings, you'll see that this makes a step-like shape. You can adjust the number of subdivisions, which will adjust the number of steps. You can adjust your size again. You can turn on extrusion. It does, as we had shown it does, and round. Your next option is spline, and this one is fun because you have all of these same settings up here, but you also can click on here to add in points, and you can adjust the shape of this. And if you increase the number of subdivisions, it will be easier for you to see the shape you are creating. And the spline allows you to create a bevel that is a specific shape. If you select absolute value, it will make it very, very accurate to that shape with the absolute value, and it will determine that based on the max shape height. So you can make this longer, you can make it shorter. For this, I'm going to use the normal rounding option because we don't need all that. And we have these other options out here. You can bevel the outside. This is usually turned off because when you bevel something, Cinema 4D automatically compensates by making that object smaller so that when you bevel it, it doesn't look like it's getting larger. Now, if you turn on bevel outside, it will allow the form to expand to compensate for that beveled form on the edges. If you leave that off, it will not become larger like what you see on my screen here. Avoid self-intersections. If you turn this off, you'll run the risk of parts of your model intersecting. This helps prevent that from happening. You don't want intersections while you're 3D modeling. You don't want it while you are rendering. You don't want it while you are 3D printing. It causes all kinds of errors regardless of what you're working on. I suggest to always keep on avoid self-intersections. It's very nice that Cinema 4D added in this setting here, and it gives you a lot of options so you can turn it off. I suggest to always keep it on. You can choose to break Phong shading. You'll see this more if I turn off our lines and we just keep on our garage shading. You'll see that we have this Phong tag here, and this is shading in between the polygons based on this Phong angle actually. You can see if we decrease this angle to 0, there is no shading happening. This is the angle between the polygons. If we increase this, it's very nice and smooth. Now, let's say we break the Phong shading on here. You could see that it's breaking the Phong shading here. If we check this off, it's much more smooth with our Phong tag. This is breaking that shading. So you could do whatever you like in terms of that. For your lollipop, this next option here is selections. We are almost done. This Phong tag tab over here is just because of this being added. We went through the Phong tag in another episode, so I'm not going to go through it today. You can check that out in the link below. I'll leave it in the description. Under our selections, we can select our shell. If I click this button here, you'll see another tag show up right next to it. This is a selection tag, but it's a specific kind of selection tag. It's a cache proxy tag. I'll click on that, and it is turning that into a selection. So what this is doing is it is creating a tag that you can use to texture this. So if I created a standard material and we just made this green as an example, not saying that we should actually make this color, and we applied it to here and we used the same name as in our selection tag, and here you can choose to make this selection here. It's just making the shell that color. There's different parts of this model. You can also affect the start cap, and it'll add in a selection tab for that. That is C1. So if I change this to C1, you can see what part of our model that is. So these selections, you're just choosing to create these tags here so that you can control your texturing. You can even do this for edges if you're going to be using these selections to affect something in particular with your edges. You have that as an option too. That's just good to be aware of. I don't really think we need these because, again, we're making a lollipop, but I want you to know all the options available. I'm going to delete this redshift material here. We're going to add in a cylinder because we are making a lollipop. I'm going to make this 0.2 so that it's a little bit smaller than the candy part of this. The height can be 10 inches. I'm going to drop this down. Maybe we want this to be more than 10 inches. I'll make it 12. That looks better to me. And now I don't need that material. I'm going to create a new redshift material. I'm going to name this candy. The main focus for this tutorial is 3D modeling, so we'll briefly go through creating some basic materials for this lollipop. You can open up your standard material by double-clicking on it, and you can see we have some different nodes here. We aren't going to be diving into the nodes today, but you'll see we have this base color, we have reflection, transmission. For this lollipop, we want it to be a little bit transparent, so I'm actually going to increase the weight of the transmission. And if I hit the IPR, you can begin to see this render. I can even go ahead and drop in a redshift sun and sky rig for right now, just so that we have some lighting in here. You can, of course, add in some area lights and really do some complex lighting and get creative with it. I just want to show you some of the basics so that you can wrap up this project on your own if you're new to this. Within our transmission, I'd like to increase the weight, and this will make it more, it'll remove the opacity, it'll make this a little bit more see-through. So now you'll see this updates in here, and add our material here. You could see that now it is clear. But what if you want this to have a fun color to it? Well, you can add a color to the transmission, and here, let's say we want to make this a pink color. So that's starting to look nice. What we can do is we can also drop in a cyc using Shift C to open up the command manager, and then I'll search, and I'm going to make these icons a little bit smaller down here. We can drop this into our scene. I'll add in a nice little backdrop here. If I zoom out, you'll probably be able to see it better, and then I can drop this down a little bit lower. So now we have this rendering out pretty nice. Sometimes these lollipops will have bubbles inside of them, so if you want to go ahead and add that, you can drop in a sphere, make it very small, like 0.1, and we can size this up a little bit, maybe 0.2 we'll try. We can see the size of it in here, and move it up a little bit. You can try applying the candy material here. If that doesn't look quite right to you, you can also try duplicating this. I'm holding Control and we're making a duplicate of that material. We can go ahead and change this to just be no color, absence of color for the bubble, and I'll rename this bubble. And we can drop this material on here and delete the old material. Now it's not showing up very much, so what we could do is we could add some complexity to our lighting, or since this is a little bit of a defect in this, maybe we want to add some little bit of roughness to the reflection, and that'll help it show up a little bit more within here. And now we're beginning to be able to see that show up in here. You could add another one if you want to. Hold Control in order to duplicate it, and then use the hotkey T in order to scale it down. So that adds some extra realism in there. I'll drop these within the hierarchy of the stick, and I'll also drop the candy within the hierarchy of the stick, just so that when we move this, we have it move as one group. I might move up this just a little bit so that this is really sitting on that surface. Now we also need a texture for the stick here, so I'm adding in another standard material. I'm going to name this stick. I'll add it here. And instead of it being gray, usually when I see these, they're a light gray or a white color, so I'll do that. I think this redshift sky is a little bit on the strong side. I'm going to reduce its strength a little bit. That shading looks a little bit more realistic to me, and maybe I even want to come back in here and reset the roughness to the default, because I want to see how that looks. Maybe I'll still keep it up a little bit. If you right click on the left arrow, it sets things back to default. You can adjust your settings for your materials within the Attributes Manager, or you can double click on a material in order to open it up in the node editor to have a little bit more control. And now that we have this done, we also need a material for this background here. So let's create a material here. We'll name this Psych. And we'll drop this on here. I want this to have a little bit more roughness to it, so I'll increase the reflection roughness. We can adjust the color in here. I'll click on this, maybe lighten it up. We could try adding in some color here, maybe a nice blue color would look good. You'll notice that when we make this blue, it's also reflecting light back onto the surface that is blue, because Cinema 4D is calculating all those light bounces using redshift. So colors reflect off of each other, and you'll notice that does a whole lot for this. So this is looking pretty nice. Maybe I want to add in another light here. I'll use T to scale it down nice and small. I'll move it over here to the right, and then I'll rotate it around. I'm using the middle mouse button right now so that I can adjust the lighting in the top view while also seeing how it's affecting it in my perspective view. So this could be a helpful tool for you as well. You can move over these by clicking and dragging when you see your cursor change to arrows. And sometimes as you adjust the lighting, you may feel like you need to go back and adjust your materials a little bit too. We can rotate this while holding Control in order to create a duplicate. And we can move this back in space. We can do that again. I hit R, and while I rotate this, I'm holding Control. This would be Command on a Mac. And now we can move this back again in space. Just need to select the blue arrow instead of the green one. I can even lower this down a little bit. And we get this really interesting reflection also on the floor by doing this. So that's kind of fun. And this is your own personal project, so I'm not going to tell you everything that you should do or shouldn't do. I just suggest to have some fun with it and come up with your own creative composition. You can arrange these however you'd like, that you feel looks good. And you should do whatever sparks joy for you, because that's ultimately the goal. And if you want some variation between these, maybe some of them have those little bubbles in them and some of them don't, or they're in different positions, you can really get pretty experimental and detailed, even about a simple project like this one here. I might move the backdrop down a little bit more. So this was really fun. I hope you had fun as well working on your project, and I'd love to see it if you post it anywhere on Instagram or anywhere else. If you tag me, I'll get to see it on LinkedIn, whatever social media you're on, I'd love to see it. And I really hope you found this tutorial helpful, really doing a deep dive into all the settings. And I hope to see you again next time on Ambient 3D Animations. If you'd like to be notified when the next episode comes out, please hit like and subscribe. I go over another 3D modeling tool each week. And thank you so much for watching. I always appreciate it.